Gators Breakdown episode 99 is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And joining me tonight, co-host Bill Sykes. You can find Bill on Twitter at RealBSykes. Bill, personally, you and I got a couple things going on. I'm house searching, house hunting, going through all the paperwork. You're kind of doing the same, but we can still find a way to throw a Gators breakdown together. But you and I are kind of hectic right now on the personal side.
Life in a blender, my friend. I'm just glad the Gators are winning, man. It kind of at least gives us an outlet to talk about things that aren't stressful. So
that is true. As long as they keep winning, we're happy. But it's kind of funny because you want to work on this house stuff on the weekends, but hey, still college football comes first.
Yeah, you had to push back some appointments, make some time in the schedule for football, man. But I think that's expected down here in the Southeast, isn't it?
It is. I mean, even my realtor is like, okay, we'll watch the game and then we'll talk. I'm like, you know me.
That's right. Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm going through, man.
All right, before we dive in here, remember, you can find all your Gators Breakdown episodes on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. Search on those sites or get the links by following Gators Breakdown on Twitter and on Facebook at Gators Breakdown. When on iTunes, please rate and review the show. Bill, week by week, this Gators offense is starting to find itself just a little bit. After the debacle versus Michigan, some adjustments are being made by head coach Jim McElwain and offensive coordinator Doug Nussmeier. The main focal point of this offense is letting the ground game carry, with the quarterback situation still figuring itself out. Running backs Leake Davis, LaMichael P. Ryan, Mark Thompson behind an improving offensive line are becoming the identity of this team 4 games into the season. Florida's averaging 65 plays per game, but against Vandy, they had 78. So the tempo has been a little faster. They just had more success converting third and fourth downs, when they go for it on fourth down, and just getting first downs in general. That's kind of what I see with this offense. So when you look at, it can't be just as simple as after the Michigan game and then they had the canceled game, Doug Nussmeier's in the box now. It can't be that simple for why this offense is kind of starting to find itself.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely got they're kind of getting their sea legs under themselves, I think. I think they're adjusting to the departures of Scarlett and Callaway. They're kind of, they've said, okay, here's what we're working with now. They started out behind the 8 ball because of that, kind of go back to the drawing board. We had Heggie in there as a redshirt freshman starting with a line. There was a lot of disadvantages starting off against a good opponent like Michigan. And while they really didn't have a lot going, and they, again, remember, they had a redshirt freshman quarterback. There's just a lot of youth there, a lot of uncertainty, didn't know where they could really lean to find some bread and butter. And I think they're starting to do that now, with the emergence of Davis, with the offensive line playing a little better, albeit against opponents that are not the best on the schedule up front on the defensive fronts. But they're rushing the ball a lot better. We've seen the rush yards go in 4 games from 11 to 168 to 186 to 218. And then, at the same time of possession has increased from 25 minutes, 47 seconds to 27 minutes to 15 seconds. Then against Kentucky, it was up to 29 minutes and 55 seconds. And against Vandy, they actually had possessed the ball for 35 minutes and 59 seconds. So they're keeping their defense off the field better each week. They're running the ball better each week. And so this is carrying them into the second half where they're fresher, and we're seeing them wear down opponents. We're seeing them impose their will a little bit.
I'm glad you said impose their will a little bit, because I didn't really plan on going this way until we just started talking. But going into the Michigan game, and we slammed the coaching staff, and rightfully so. Especially more Jim McElwain for hyping up this offensive line, and then to lay an egg that they did against Michigan. That front seven, we talked about it going into that game so much and how much Florida was probably going to struggle in that game. But, since then, those guys have found themselves. And you mentioned Heggie just needing more experience. Ivy, you know what? For as experienced as he was still, trying to figure out his way at left tackle. He seems to be coming along now. If he could just help out on some screen passes, Flame would be even better. But as far as standard pass blocking, the right side of the line still struggles at time. And, Luke Del Rio was kind of, evading pressure. But, from the Michigan game, for the way those guys to bounce back the way they have, and now each week by week look like maybe what Jim McElwain was talking about in the preseason, where they actually can lean on this offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Brett Hickey. I think McElwain said he was his offensive player of the week this week, internally.
SEC did it too.
Yeah, but yeah, that's right. SEC player of the week along with Davis. I think Leake Davis was the freshman of the week.
Yep.
Between him, I think the tackles are pretty good. They've still got a real problem at right guard. Just a big time bust going on there. They're creating big plays between Jordan and Johnson. Mm-hmm. I think that McCoy is a guy that, while scrappy, he's got some physical limitations where, if it's a guy he's man on man with, it's 50-50. He has a little bit of a problem making contact on linebackers and sustaining blocks there. But this week they were able to do that. And I think part of that is that Vanderbilt doesn't have the most athletic defensive front, like I said. And you still see some breakdowns, but it is markedly improved from what we've seen. And we've seen this steadily improve over the course of the season so far. So I'm not ready to write it off as just say, oh, these are cupcakes, because it's not like you're playing, Jacksonville State.
Right.
I mean, these are SEC opponents. They're going out there, they're showing improvement. And so that's all you can ask at this point. And now we go to the next test. I mean, that's the way football goes. And so hopefully they can pass it again this week.
Yeah, but and we're talking about adjustments, and I mentioned Doug Nussmeier. What have you seen from this offense so far? We've kind of mentioned just honestly the offensive line just playing better, but is it for Doug Nussmeier also adjusting to the pieces now that Florida has? They've found a playmaker in Leake Davis, and he's now getting more carries. Kadarius Toney has found out to be a weapon in the screen game, and of course the Wildcat. They've even put Brandon Powell back last week against Kentucky in the Wildcat, and now they're starting to find ways. And we've seen the adjustment from the Michigan game up until the last three games, and with Felipe Franks, it was a lot of three-step drops, get the ball out of his hand. A lot of that is Felipe Franks is a kind of a one-read guy right now until he can get his legs under him, until he can get some more experience there. But he's got it's a quick passing game right now. We know he can throw the ball deep, and that's going to be there from time to time. But right now, with the way this offensive line pass blocks, you can't blame the coaches right now for wanting to adjust with getting the ball out on screens. We'd still like to see some more slants and some routes across the middle. But right now, it's kind of designed to, and the adjustment that they've made is get the ball out of the quarterback's hands.
Yeah, I think that the bread and butter of this offense right now is to get everybody moving laterally between the front seven of the defense, the offensive line, the skill position players. And because they've got guys like Toney and they've got guys like Malik Davis that excel at change of direction, that have good vision, and that can turn on a dime and find a running lane, they don't have to blow people off the ball to create space. They want those defenders to be so concerned with that lateral speed and that threat on the perimeter that they create those gaps themselves. They want to be a cutback running game. However, this week, and again, because I feel like they were just better up front than Vanderbilt, they didn't rely on that as much as we've seen in previous weeks. I mean, they still love to pull the guards, and I've seen them pull centers and tackles and everything else, but they still want to put a hat in somebody's ear on the blocking schemes just about at all times. But you did see some power blocking schemes, and they like to change the pace. And I feel like because they have some success in that, the cutback schemes and the zone runs and the stretch plays this week, I think they were able to take advantage of that by having the defense anticipate that, and then they did run right at them with some success.
Yeah, and with LSU coming to town, I'll just hit that quickly. You know what? That's from what we've seen against LSU, against Mississippi State. Of course, they're a misdirection, running laterally type of team as well, but they beat them up front. Troy beat them up front this past week, so you got to believe that's going to be part of the game plan too, as well from Florida. But an adjustment from a year ago, and from what I see now, is in dealing with the run game, is the rotation seems to be figured out and not so predictable with which running backs are in the game. These guys seem to have a role. As true freshmen from Malik Davis, the last couple of games show they like him closing out games. And two stats that I put out on Twitter today that just are mind-blowing right now for this true freshman. On first down, he has 14 attempts for 141 yards, averaging 10.1 yards a carry there and one touchdown. In the fourth quarter of games, this is kind of what I was going to, 23 attempts, 221 yards, 9.6 yards, averaging one touchdown. So this is the true freshman that the coaches are trusting in this scenario, and it's about getting the best player the ball in crunch time. And we've seen Mark Thompson have some tough runs and shedding tacklers, and he looks to be the guy they like best catching the ball out of the backfield. P. Ryan is featured just about as much as Leake Davis, but they seem to like him in short yardage situations as evidence against Vandy, especially in the goal line. He was the guy they really wanted to go to there. The plan just seems to be better as far as a running back rotation goes, and more of an acknowledgement of what guy to go to. So, Malik Davis leads the guys right now with 43 carries for 319 yards, 7.4 average. But LaMichael Piron's only got 5 less carries at 38 for 148, but he's averaging 3.9. So, it's almost a 3.5 yard difference in what you get from Malik Davis to LaMichael Piron. But I do like, what we're seeing from Doug Nussmeier and Jim McElwain is they kind of know the role of these running backs right now.
Yeah, it's kind of funny you say that too. And just to start getting into some of these questions we got from our Twitter followers this week, we had several about Malik Davis and the running backs. Andy Agent at Team Andy R says, what is it about Davis that he is separating himself from the other running backs? Vision, patience, quickness, and footwork is what he suggested. Falcons Fury at South Life Gold says, will we see Malik get the bulk of the carries and maybe Perrine in the third and short situations from here on out? And he thinks that Malik can be elite. And I think he's bordering on that now, statistically speaking.
Yeah.
And then Lucas Mann said, what are your expectations from Leake Davis? Well, it's kind of funny. You look at these guys and they have such a good complementary skill set. Malik Davis, to answer the question about his skill set, he is a guy that just sifts through traffic. He has good vision. He's a start-stop runner, a good change of pace guy that's still north-south. And so when he sees these cutback lanes, he's exploiting them, and he's exploiting them quickly. However, he's not a guy like Rainey necessarily that, if you put a hat on him, he, going to go down instantly. He's running with authority. I mean, he's not a huge back. I think he's right at 200 pounds, maybe a hair under, maybe 195. And so while he's not going to bulldoze like Thompson will, he will power through some tackles. And so between him and then Perrine, who has shown good balance and kind of that next medium level guy that runs with a little more power, maybe a little less speed. And then you go on up to Thompson. He's your power back, but not slow. It's just a nice complementary skill set. And so far, what we saw this week at Vanderbilt was them really hitting their stride to keep Vanderbilt off balance within the running game. They're having a hard time balancing between the lateral, like I said, between the, the power run straight forward. And then the more you get that going, that's when it sets up the play action passes and some of the other things that we've seen so far.
Yeah, and what we've seen, this run game and the offensive line has become the identity. In the last 3 games, 116 attempts, 572 yards, averaging 190 yards a game, and 7 touchdowns. So, I mean, that has been the theme of these last few weeks against Tennessee, against Kentucky, and against Vandy, and it's gotten better week by week. And probably one more thing to help throw this in there is still, I know you start seeing it too much and it kind of gets stale, but until teams start stopping it, I think Florida should run it even more, and that's Kadarius Toney and the Wildcat. It has. There are the Wildcat detractors out there, who says, oh, that's too predictable. But, hey, look, until somebody stops it, keep doing it.
No, I agree with you. I tweeted right before the game, I hope to see, Toney get 5 or 6 snaps in the Wildcat, and that's exactly what we saw out of him. And, to varying degrees of success, but overall it was good. I mean, he did have an incomplete pass, but he's a guy that's going to generate positive yards. Unless he's swarmed in the backfield, you're going to probably get 5 to 7 yards out of the guy on those Wildcat carries. At least we've seen that so far. And, with a guy like Franks, and we'll get into him, in his situation here in a little bit, but because he's not, fully operational, I guess you would say, as far as, he doesn't offer the full maturity level of a quarterback to where he can run the whole playbook and exploit at all levels yet. It gives you that additional offensive threat. It's another piece of upside for your offense and a change of pace to keep teams off balance, especially considering that he's going to be in the huddle on a lot of plays anyway. It's not like they're going to notice him trotting out on the field as just a quarterback change. It's something that could catch defenses off guard, and it's something that could pop for a big play here and there.
Yeah, one more thing, kind of dating back to the Vandy game a little bit, is explosive plays, and especially for this offense, but getting better in that regard on offense, and it's helping the team, especially in the red zone, because a lot of these explosives are touchdowns or they're leading to easy touchdowns for the offense. Versus Vandy, the offense had 7 explosive plays. 4 passes over 20 yards and 3 runs over 12 yards. McElwain announced today at the press conference that Tyree Cleveland is expected to miss the LSU game. I don't know if I totally believe that or not, but his explosiveness has been one of the main reasons Florida has been better in this category this season. He's had catches of 45, 49, 50, and 63 yards. So, you start looking at how important, this was a big thing Urban Meyer was big on, and he mentioned explosives and explosive plays. And, it's kind of categorized as a passing play over 20 yards and a rush over 12 yards. You could really tell in this Vandy game, it really made it easier for this offense to score because a lot of these explosives led, like I said, to touchdowns or almost to the goal line and sets up easy scores.
Yeah, listen, Florida right now is still 85th in the nation in third down conversion. And for all the improvement that we made and a lot of the yards we saw this week, they're also still 121st in the nation on first downs. And that kind of lends itself to, okay, well, if they're getting yards, but they're not getting a lot of first downs, that means they're picking up these chunk plays. And while we did see, I think it was 3 drives over 10 plays against Kentucky, and there was obvious improvement, there's still not a team that typically just will march down the field over the long run and can sustain those kind of drives. And again, that's why I want to see Tony on the field with the ball in his hands. They may, as they're dealing with some of the personnel deficiencies they're still working through, and as they're working through the maturity issues with some of the younger players, they need to pop these big plays. They need to do it in big games too, because it could be the difference in a win or a loss if you can't depend on getting a 10-yard or 10-play drive when you need it.
Yeah, and we know this Gator offense has kind of struggled in that regard anyway. From the way they act, or for the way they put together an offense, it's because there's always been so many mistakes. You couldn't really rely on the offensive line so much, and I think defenses would really just let Florida mess it up themselves. So I think you start hitting these chunk plays, and you don't have to worry about so much trying to put together these 9-10 plays, and eventually just mess it up. Florida is now just getting the big plays, and it helps. There's been research out there for how much explosive plays lead to scoring, and they start figuring that out. The red zone, they're 9 for 9 in the red zone. They're 100% in the red zone, Bill, so far this year, and that's a pretty big change from what we've seen in years past. And against Vandy, 5 rushing touchdowns. They're finding ways to score. There's still a long way to go. Franks is still. I mentioned the one read right now, not going past his first read all that much, but we're starting to see a little progression. He's starting to get some tight ends involved and starting to spread the ball out a little. I got away with a couple throws, the underthrow that Swain caught down at the 2-yard line, and then right before halftime, he fires a ball into the end zone that should have been picked, but with his arm strength, he maybe just knew he had it there, and the defender couldn't make a play on it. But we're starting to see. Hopefully with these home games coming up, I think LSU, even though they got beat, they're still going to bring a formidable team. They're going to be ready to play. Texas A&M is not as bad as they look, really. They lost to UCLA, but since they haven't lost since then, barely getting by South Carolina this weekend. But the competition does ramp up a little bit for Felipe Franks. And he's not going to get away with some of the stuff he got away with Vanderbilt, but hopefully, he can calm himself. There's a run game to lean on. The coaches can help him out there. If the run game is going, that's going to help a young Felipe Franks. You can bring him along a little slow. You don't have to take as many chances. And as long as he doesn't have to take as many chances, I think Florida can work with Felipe Franks in maturing this offense.
Yeah, as we get into the meat of the schedule here, when it goes beyond the bottom half of the SEC East as far as opponents go, and you get into the Georgias and LSUs and Florida States of the world, this turnover margin is going to be an issue. And right now, Florida is 94th in the nation, and it's kind of hard to believe considering some of the great interceptions we've seen. But I believe they're one of 5 teams without a fumble recovery. And I think it was Dooley that asked Mac about that in the press conference today. And that's going to be a big test for Franks. I mean, we had some people asking about him, saying, how do we see the passing attack faring against LSU? That's from John Sigel at JR Sigel. Mamoon 0806 says, do you think Franks has improved enough to sustain drives? The Real Gator at the Real Amit says, do you think Franks will get faster in new progressions? Well, he's going to have to. And then lastly, Gator Nation 1, before I answer this, says, do you think it's possible? Actually, we'll get to that one in a minute. My apologies. But as far as Franks, he's going to have to be the guy that takes us beyond the chunk plays. He's going to be the guy that sustains these drives against the better teams. The running game itself is not going to cut it when you get to these fronts that start going back to the run blitzes that are more athletic up front. I believe Franks can do it, but I don't know how much. I don't know how much we're going to see that in this first year with him at the helm. There was some debate over whether this is a talent ceiling for him. Like some people say, well, if a quarterback can't read defenses, they just can't do it. But then other people rightly point to the fact that he needs reps. And this is where it hurts that he's starting out green and he never got those chances last year. And it's just different than spring practice. It's different than the defense you see day in and day out, where you have defensive coordinators from around the country that are game planning for you, that are watching your eyes. They're telling their safeties to watch your eyes, or not always watch their eyes, but I don't know. We're just going to have to wait and see what he gives us, because I am concerned that if this running game doesn't have the support of Franks in the intermediate game, it's going to get dicey.
That is my big worry about Franks. If the running game isn't going, is there confidence in him that he can put a game on his shoulders to go out there and win? I guess LSU, maybe, for the way they're playing right now. A&M, the way they're playing, maybe. But if that running game isn't there against Georgia, if Georgia is what we've seen the last couple of weeks, he'll have some trouble there. But, hey, look, there's 4 weeks left until that game. You got some things to figure out. You got a bye week before that. And you know what? A lot of this is on these coaches. Scheme up some plays to where, yes, we know the first read is kind of where Franks goes. And if it's not there, sometimes there's some panic. But, if you know that your quarterback is kind of held back in that regard, and, it's not every time where he's only reading one read and looking to get out of pocket. And he'll read past the first read sometimes. It's there. But it is, it is a complication, and these coaches will have to figure something out. They'll have to work with Felipe Franks' limitations. And if the run game isn't going there, that's when we kind of might see the youth of Felipe Franks.
Yeah, and I kind of misspoke there. I mean, he needs to make these DBs pay for watching his eyes. He needs to look off these safeties. And I'll tell you what concerns me, and kind of transitioning into the wide receivers. We've had a lot of people ask about Cleveland's injury. Mm-hmm. And now I know people that heard the press conference today, I think Mac was being facetious. He said that it's a high ankle sprain, which I believe he was being truthful about. And those typically are longer lasting and lingering ankle injuries that it can just be with you for a while. And he says, well, I guess he'll be ready for the spring game. I don't believe that Mac was serious about him being out for the year. But we had a lot of people ask about it. Oliver Berry says, what's new since yesterday with Tyree Cleveland? Well, he is supposed to miss the game, according to Coach McElwain.
And Tyree did tweet that he's okay yesterday.
Yeah. I know it's some controversy. Maybe we'll see. But Florida's own says Cleveland might be out against LSU. What playmaker are you a watch for to replace him? Sean Hankins says he will step up in his absence. Coach Chomp says whatever happened to Daquan Green, could he be the guy? And then Jordan at UV Potential 15 says, who do you believe can step into that position? Well, here's the thing I'm concerned with. Cleveland's been great. They've been good in the slot. Powell's made clutch plays. Yep. Tony has done what he's done. But other than Swain's, he had that big-time catch off the deflection for 33 yards this week versus Vanderbilt.
And the wide-open touchdown against Kentucky.
Right, and that one. But even counting that one, other than since the first week when Hammond had 71 yards and 3 catches versus Michigan, those two, Swain and Hammond, who are your Y, your number twos who might step into the number one, the X role, they've combined for 5 catches and 60 yards and 1 touchdown over 3 games.
Yep.
That's worrisome, because only Cleveland has shown to be that vertical threat, that guy that can line up on the outside and be targeted. Now, is that them not getting separation, or is that Frank's not seeing them? Is that scheme? We're about to find out, because one of those guys, it's probably one of the two. Yeah, they're going to have to emerge and give that vertical threat, because if you take that away, then everything starts compressing down with the defenses, and it's going to be increasingly hard to run. That's when the safeties can walk up more. It's going to be a problematic situation. In my opinion, it's got to be Swain and Hammond. Daquan Green, I think, is probably a year away. I think he's going to be an excellent receiver. He might start stepping into that role now with Cleveland out. He might become number 3 behind Swain and Hammond, and who knows? Right now, I'm looking for Swain to be that guy, but that's kind of an educated guess.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there. I think Swain is the guy that has to step up. But Hammond got a lot of love in the spring, but we know how spring warriors are, and they never kind of turn out to be. But we saw enough of Hammond last year, and I think the word coming out of spring of how consistent he was and fall camp. There's something there. You just have to figure out why he's not getting the ball, and maybe, like you said, is Frank's not seeing him? Is it scheme? I don't know. But another thing about scheme build that I was kind of asked also on Twitter is, the tight ends haven't really been used as much as we've seen it in Mac area, and the middle of the field still. And I think with a young quarterback, that's kind of where we're seeing a struggle in this passing game is, with progressions of reads, the middle of the field is hardly being used right now. And, of course, that's where all the congestion is. And Felipe Franks maybe, is learning, doesn't want to turn the ball over, so he's not forcing the ball in the middle of the field. But, not seeing the tight ends used as kind of a safety blanket. And maybe that's starting to turn around with Morrill Stevens getting a couple big catches and helping Felipe Franks out on the drive where they go on to score. He had 2 big catches for, I believe, 45 yards on that drive. So maybe it's starting to turn around, and Keontae Lewis is starting to become a better blocker a little bit. And we've seen him, especially I remember the Georgia game last year, we had a very nice catch and run. DeAndre Goolsby hasn't really been seen a lot, but I've kind of, with the way Max had this offense the last couple of years, and you would think the tight ends would be more of a security blanket for a young quarterback, I'm still kind of surprised that we haven't seen more from those guys.
Yeah, and nothing could be more helpful right now than for that safety valve tight end to emerge for Franks. I mean, a guy just to a move the chains kind of guy, even for a 5-6 yard completion when things break down. And Morrill Stevens had a couple big catches, almost got a touchdown this week. And he's not a guy that's been really talked about or thought to be a guy of that potential. But you're right. The tight ends have been absent from the offense. The only time you've seen Goolsby lately, I mean, he had a couple of big catches against Kentucky that were massive. But mainly when we've noticed him, it's been on pass protection breakdowns, letting somebody off the edge. And we still saw that this week. And it's just got to get cleaned up. I mean, the bottom line is if you can't get something out of your tight ends in the passing game, and then they're not helping you on the edge and pass protections, then it becomes a liability for your entire offense. I mean, it's almost it's just something they don't even need to be out there.
Right. Bill, anything else on the offensive side of the ball before we move on?
No, just really happy with Heggie still, and I think he has loads of potential. And I meant to mention this earlier. While like I said, I think there's still some deficiencies personnel-wise on the offensive line, and I'm not like thrilled about where things are. It is getting better, and he's a guy that I think it's more of a physical limitation from youth. He hasn't had the time in the program that some others have, and so you still see him struggling a little bit physically. But he's a guy that moves well. He's getting in position, and I think you're going to see him continue to improve throughout the season. And I think he's primed for a big year next year.
For sure. But Bill, the defense is still trying to find their way. They got shredded for 264 yards through the air versus Vanderbilt. That doesn't sound like a lot, but the way they were doing it, the communication and the scheme must get better. From what we've seen, especially against Vanderbilt, that was Kyle Sherman kind of lit them up a little bit. They gave up 5 explosive pass plays over 20 yards and only 1 run over 12 yards. So that was an improvement from Ralph Webb eating them up in the past, but. Hey, look, Jim McElwain's noticing this too, and his presser today kind of called the coaches out a little bit. And quote, I tell you, I don't think we did a great job in the film study piece with what our defensive staff gave our guys. Some of the clues immediately based on formation. I'm not sure we did a great job communicating that, and yet, you know what? There's Mac's favorite phrase. And yet, you know what? They took advantage of it. So things that we see from this offensive communication, especially in the middle with the safeties and the linebackers giving up the chunk yardage plays that they gave up to Vanderbilt. And then also, it's having to stay into a 4-3 and you have a bad matchup of a linebacker on a running back. They kind of went more nickel in the second half. That was an adjustment and one thing that helped in the second half. But it's these chunk yardage plays that are really killing this defense right now.
Yeah, this week it was all about the pass. And, you mentioned Jim McElwain's comments in the presser about how he wasn't happy with the film preparation and the strategy basically going into this and not being prepared to defend against what they were going to try to do. I actually had a couple of people reach out to me this afternoon and say that he made his displeasure known to the coaches behind the scenes. That he was not happy camper about that. And yeah, I mean, listen, we didn't see Vanderbilt exploit in the running game. They've typically been the Ralph Webb show the past few years, and it's not so this year. I don't think. But I think this week, even though they didn't have the rushing yards, I think their plan of attack was to exploit Florida's young and struggling secondary. Now, I'm not saying the corners are struggling, but we know that we've had problems there. And what I noticed, there was a lot of 4-3. There was some nickel. but you just kept seeing these deep completions over the middle and everywhere else where you've got a linebacker or a safety that's out of position to defend. I think the linebackers are being asked to do a little too much. I don't think they're getting enough support from the safeties. I think you've got blown coverages. It's just not. It did not look good schematically. It didn't look like the players were being put in a position to succeed, and it didn't look like they were always executing when they were. Now, I think up front they were pretty good.
Yeah,
I think we know that Max. Go ahead.
The defensive line did go invisible for way too long.
They did. Jordan Sherritt was very good at times. C.C. Jefferson had his moments. I think we're seeing some youth-related depth issues at defensive tackle, like I've been saying since the spring. I think they have gone to the freshmen now increasingly, and I think it's a big deal because I think some of the depth they had at defensive tackle in the last few weeks was getting destroyed. And I don't want to out it more than that, but Conliffe and Slayton look very good at times, but they look like freshmen out there. And then when you can't collapse the pocket, it puts even more pressure on the edge rush. And I think we saw good moments from Polite. I saw Antonius Clayton get his first snaps at defensive end, which I've been waiting for. And he actually got a good edge rush at one point with a quarterback hurry. So there's a lot to be excited about on the defensive line moving forward. But at linebacker and at safety right now, I know as much as excitement as there's been about the linebackers, I think they're being put out of their wheelhouse a little bit. And it's not good results. I mean, they gave up a load of passing yards and a lot of big plays, and it was ugly. You shouldn't do that against Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, those guys are young too. They filled in admirably last year, toward the end of last year with all the injuries to Anzalone and Davis, but they were still surrounded by a very good front four and a very good secondary where if they did mess up, you saw Marcel Harris and and the like of Tabor and Wilson being able to make up for some of those deficiencies. And that granted, they had some big plays and they played great in the bowl game, but I think you're seeing the youth of them too. Teams started getting tape on these guys too, and started seeing their tendencies and how over aggressive they are at times and not staying in their lanes at times. The running back screen game still seems to be a problem for this defense. But it's kind of, you get a catch-22, a little bit. With the Tennessee game, they started really good, and they were shutting that offense down, and then in the fourth quarter, Tennessee started to find their way. Against Kentucky and Vanderbilt, they were kind of scoring earlier, and then they clamped down in the fourth quarter. So, it's kind of, you don't know what you're getting or what the problem is, if there's adjustments or if there's not adjustments, because each week it's kind of been the same story with what the problem is. It's just when the problem shows up.
Yeah, and listen, I'll tell you, I'm not a huge fan of putting this defense on an island across the board right now. Yeah. When you got no depth at linebacker, and look, I do like Reese. I like Joseph. We've seen how violent he can be in a good way and how he can disrupt a game. I like Keelan Johnson, and I like Jeremiah Moon's potential. But I don't think these are guys that you ask to be covering a tight end on a post route, or a seam, or I don't know. I just think he's asking a little much of them, and especially when they're not getting the help they need at safety. I just don't like sitting back and manning up at this point with a young defense. I really think that they need to blitz more. I think they need to be a little more unpredictable and come at them for different angles. I would love to see what a guy like Chris Henderson, even though he's not the most physically imposing cornerback at his young age as a freshman, or Marco Wilson. I want to see those guys coming off the edge. I want to see defenses have to worry about Florida coming from different angles to where you're not asking these guys to cover down the field for as long as they are, because like you said, the pass rush is good, but it's not Jadavon Clowney out there. It's not like you've got edge rushers that are just completely terrorizing on every play. And so you're going to have breakdowns if you don't mix it up. And that was one thing Micah Bowden asked us is, do we think Shannon blitzes any of this week to force pressure? That might be a natural option after what Michael Wayne said.
There you go. I think what Michael Wayne said, what we saw, I think the writing on the wall was, hey, something different has to happen. You can't sit back there and because it's happened too many times where this defensive line can't get back there and the quarterback has all day to throw. Against Tennessee, it didn't start out that way, but then eventually, as they got time to throw, that started turning their offense around. Steven Johnson last week with Kentucky made some things happen to get there. That was kind of more on him. The defensive line played pretty well as a whole, I thought, in that game. But Vanderbilt, past the first couple drives, it was Sherman had all day to throw and pick apart this defense, and especially in the middle of the field where we said the lack of communication was. And I remember the one touchdown play where Nick Washington basically ran across the field to get way out of the way and leave a guy for Vanderbilt wide open when they had two guys in the end zone. They were kind of almost beside each other. But that one touchdown from there, I mean, Washington completely moved himself out of the play altogether. So, good scheming. You got to give Vanderbilt credit there. They probably saw something on tape that would lead him to believe that's probably what was going to happen with Washington there, but the communication just wasn't there because you could see the cornerbacks turn around and just kind of wonder where he was at. So, it's just you can see the potential, you can see the playmakers there. It's just it's not being put together very good right now.
Yeah, I think one of your big problems on defense right now with that back seven is it seems like they're releasing the wrong people and putting people in one-on-one situations where they're not even really designed to be, and that's a schematic issue. That's and even if the play call is in that's right, the players obviously aren't responding to it correctly, and that's a coaching issue. I'm sorry. I don't care how young they are.
and it does sound simple. I mean, but I would like to see more blitzes, especially with these quarterbacks that who once you've seen how they react to blitzes. And it gets there, and they, especially Tennessee, they still didn't think they blitzed enough. And how much time and time again we saw where Quit Dormady, you put pressure in his face, he throws off his back foot a lot. Then that's one of the intercept, the pick six has some pressure in his face, and that happened. But if there would have been more of it, they may not even they may not even get that comeback that they had against Florida. And it's just, Bill, when did we ever think now that we would talk more positively about the offense than we would the defense?
Yeah, I know, man. But the problem with that is that your team defense is 69 and your total offense is still, I think, 97th. And so, and not to say that's not true, we are talking more positive about, we feel better about the identity. And I know people will say those stats don't matter, but if you start to look at what they're generating versus rush in the past, I mean, yes, Florida's defense is still good on third downs. They're 14th in the nation. They're
still have that bend, don't break mentality.
Yeah, there's good metrics there, but there's also bad ones. You have to take it all as a big picture. And right now what we're seeing is that the defense plays pretty well, and then boom, they give up a big play. And so it's one thing when that doesn't sting you against Kentucky and Vandy and Tennessee, but we're about to get into the big boy football. I don't care who LSU lost to. You got them coming up, and they're coming for your blood. They don't like you. You got Georgia coming up. You got FSU. I know the schedule doesn't look as daunting as it once did, but those moments can turn your season. They've got to get these coverages cleaned up. They've got to put the players in position to succeed, or else it's not going to go where we want it to go.
Bill, I mentioned the chunk plays, and a lot of it gets thrown at safety. Chauncey Gardner and his issues tackling, and Nick Washington, as I mentioned, he's just out of position a lot. And I saw the question asked, and I'm sorry I didn't get to see who asked it, but Brad Stewart, Sean Davis, when is it time for those guys to start getting some playing time? And one reason I don't think we see them, while this team has given up chunk yardage, they're still not giving up the big gigantic play, the big game changing play. Remember against Michigan when Nick Washington went out in the very first play, they went right over the head of I think it was Brad Stewart was in there, and I don't necessarily think it was his fault, but I think Chauncey Gardner was actually the one out of position there. But I think that's part of the reason why they're sticking so much with Gardner and Washington is because they don't want that big gigantic play where the team can go over the top, easily for an easy touchdown. That may not be the right way to look at it, but that's about only the reason I can say, unless. I don't know what they're seeing in practice. I don't know, we're not at practice or whatever, but, is it time to maybe start dwindling snaps for Washington and Gardner and start getting some more of the young guys back there at safety?
Well, we've seen a youth movement already in the last week or so here, like I mentioned with Conliffe, with Slayton. We don't really have anybody to see go in there at linebacker. I mean, you got like the four you've got, and then you've got a walk-on, but yeah, I think at DB you're probably going to see. I don't know what's going on with Sean Davis. I know people ask about him. I haven't really heard, but I would like to see that happen. I would like to see more nickel looks. And like I said, if those guys aren't ready to help you in a man-up situation, put them out there and let them blitz. I'd like to just see them get involved, see what they got. But Shannon, look, he knows what he's got. He's seen these kids in practice, and if he knows they're not ready, then maybe we don't see it. But they're going to have to mix it up a little bit moving forward in one way or another. Whether that's personnel, and you start getting a guy like Clayton more involved, and Sean Davis, or if you do just change the scheme and get more aggressive, something's got to change.
You know what? And it would be nice if, I'm not trying to down the offense or at all here or anything, but that would be nice if you could, start blowing some teams out where you can get some of these young guys some playing time because the score is out of reach, and Florida's, had trouble, in these last 3 weeks putting teams away or, going to from fourth quarter buzzer beaters. But, that's one advantage of having an offense to where you can blow teams out is, hey, look, it helps the whole team because you now can start getting some young guys some reps that they wouldn't get otherwise.
Yeah, it's kind of funny you talk about that. I just didn't know what to say when I was listening to McElwain's press conference last week against Kentucky, and he's like, yeah, we'd like to put these teams away earlier. I'm like, man, you were trailing by double digits in the second half. They're trying to put you away, But, yeah, listen, they have given up too many points this year against inferior opponents. They haven't held anybody to less than 20, so This is an issue. And I don't want to sound like I'm dogging on the team. I am thrilled that they've won this streak of games, that they're sitting tied in the first place with the SEC East. There is a lot to like here. We are seeing some of the old issues cleaned up. We're seeing an offensive line. Hey, they went out and got it on 4th and short a couple of times.
Yeah,
we saw them not get driven 5 yards in the backfield in those key moments.
And I threw some praise toward Nuss here. A couple, I believe 2 or 3, like 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6 runs where they went against tendency, called a draw or delayed handoff type of run on 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6, and those picked up some first downs.
Yeah, listen, man, I was on that bandwagon against Michigan too. It did look horrible.
Yes, yep.
But I also at that moment, I got a lot of heat for this tweet that I sent out during the game. Said, am I the only one seeing a talent issue here? And I think that is proving to be as much or more of the problem than play calling at this point. I feel like he's adjusted pretty well to what he's got. You're going to see a play here and there that doesn't make sense to the untrained eye because we don't know what goes on behind the scenes. I didn't like last week when they put the ball in Brandon Powell's hands 6 yard deep, in the backfield and asking him to make 3 guys miss, which he did. But as long as those moments are isolated, you can't get too crazy on the OC. And I think we are seeing a coherent identity emerge. We see what they're trying to do. It's getting better. But on defense, that's not working out as well as we'd like. We see him trusting young athletes, and they are making plays. But to me, that is creating an inconsistency in the performance. It's saying, okay, we'll get a sack, then we'll give up 12 yards. We'll get, you know what I'm saying? It just needs to stabilize back there.
For sure. Anything else, Bill? Before I had a couple shorter questions, and I know you had some too. Anything else?
Yeah, we got a few little rapid fire things. But on defense, one other question. Chris Anderson said, Gators secondary, who was a surprising bright spot for the first few games of the season, really struggled last Saturday. Cause for concern. I feel like we've talked about the concern part, but the surprise, obviously, I think it's Marco Wilson and Chris Henderson. They had lofty expectations coming in. I think by just about everyone's take on it, they've exceeded those. I mean, to come out and stabilize both corners. No, they're not, Tabor and Marco, or I'm sorry, Tabor and Quincy, but they don't have to be good. They've been better than expected, and I think that's very encouraging for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really extend on that. That's the two. That's where you have to go, and maybe we'll see some of these young safeties come in as the season moves along. But from what we've seen from those young freshmen in there, you can't ask for any more from true freshmen coming in and playing how they've played and the teams they've played so far, and asking them to do any more than what they have already done.
Yeah, I don't think you can. One last question on defense that I saw somebody ask. It was Sean Steed at Sean Steed said, "Do you think Marcel Harris will return next year or go pro after recovery?" That's hard to say right now. I haven't heard an update on his injury. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's put out a whole lot of tape, so it really wouldn't shock me if he came back, and I think it could be a big boost to this team.
Yeah, I know there was some talk of him thinking about it this past year in the draft and stuff, but I think it benefits him to come back for sure.
I do too.
I really do. Bill, we kind of Zachary, Mr. Gatorman, tweeted at us, and I think we kind of hit on this a little bit, but do you think we see more Tony in the Wildcat? And I'll kind of extend on that is maybe because Cleveland's out and we may have to lean on the run, and the Gators may have to lean on the running game a little bit more. And hey, look, I've been wanting to see more of it anyway, and I know the run game has been working, and I know and I'm not complaining about the run game and how it is, but still, I still think there's some big plays to be made anytime the ball is in Tony's hand.
Yeah, I feel the same way, and I do hope to see that that package expand for him. It's just a matter of how much he can handle and execute. I mean, like we saw the one batting completion he threw this week, although we saw the week before he dropped the dime for a deep completion. So I think if he shows that he can run a short to intermediate passing game, not complex, obviously, but if they can set up just a few little plays there for him to get a completion, that's going to create a real threat beyond him just taking a sweep or just getting out in space with the ball in his hands, and then it could really increase his snaps. If he can't, I still think you're going to probably try to get him 5 to 7 snaps a game at that position.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, I kind of like this question, Bill. So from Gator Bait LSU at Gator Nation, do you think it's possible to have 2 100-yard rushers against LSU this weekend?
I seriously doubt it.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, but they just went for some serious yards on the ground here and didn't really get that close to it. I just would be surprised. I like Leake Davis to probably end up with close to 100, and I think you could see the other two contribute 30 to 50 each, maybe, if it all goes well.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of see it because they do spread the ball out so well with these running backs and Tony and the Wildcat too. So, it may be, you're probably thinking off the top of my head, I was like, yeah, they probably can do it. But now thinking about what I was talking about before, how they kind of have the roles for these running backs now and kind of know how they want to use them. Yes, Leake Davis, if he gets the bulk of the carries and, maybe pops another big run where it's kind of easy for him to hit 100. But, can you get more big runs from other running backs, or can Tony get I don't know if I'd count Tony. If we're for the basis of his question, I'm just go P. Ryan, Thompson, and Davis. I don't know. I mean, I think the possibility is there because, LSU right now, they're giving up. The Mississippi State, they gave up 285 rushing yards. 146 of those from Williams, the running back, but Fitzgerald had 88 of those. And then against Troy, I'm trying to see. I know they're leading running back against Troy. I think Troy's running back had like 190 yards or something like that. Yeah. So they are giving up and kind of soft. I never thought I'd call an LSU team soft, but that's exactly what that team is right now. But they're going to be coming to games they're ready to play.
Yeah, they're 44th in rushing offense, that's rushing offense, and it's kind of weird on defense. They're 14th in sacks, except they only had 1 versus Mississippi State, I think it was, and it's Jekyll and Hyde with them. I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. They look bad against Troy. They got blown out versus Mississippi State, and we don't really know who they are. Transition can be that way sometimes. You see great coaches. I think Saban lost a bad game his first year, and I know that Meyer, I think, got blown out of Alabama in 2005 against them. So, is this that, and will they turn the corner in the next few weeks, or do they just have a major problem? I don't know. I think that's something for you guys to break down in the preview show. But yep. I think the main thing in that game is Franks has to protect the football because he's going to be facing off against a secondary that will make him pay for staring down receivers. And I think that Florida needs to run the ball, and they need to stop the run. If Geis plays, they got to shut him down, and they've got to get that stable of running backs going. If they can do that, it's going to take a lot of pressure off.
For sure. Kind of extending on that, Clint Lawrence, a longtime listener, Clint Lawrence out here, kind of extending to what you just said, and it is about the LSU game because this is where it's starting again for Felipe Franks. He goes, do y'all think Franks can relax now not knowing that he doesn't have to constantly be looking over his shoulder? I'm not so sure he was probably doing that anyway. I know he had a lot of respect for Luke Del Rio. And the way he talked in post-game interviews this past week after Del Rio was injured and stuff, I'm not so sure he was looking over his shoulder in the first place. But, if he was, I think that's one less worry to worry about. But, of course, the Malik Zaire talk was out there all preseason. And I guess the question now is, what do the coaches do if Frank struggles? Are they so quick to pull him because of what they have behind him, or is it no matter what, if he gets to this certain point where they don't think he can get it done, here comes Malik Zaire? I don't think that should happen. I think the rest of this season should be live and die with Felipe Franks.
Yeah, it's just going to have to be. Tony, I guess, could start to take more snaps if we see, if he just comes from nowhere and shows more in the passing game. But this is a sink or swim moment in this season for both Franks and the team. They're going to rise and fall with him. And, we're going to see if he can be a threat in the intermediate passing game, if he can find a connection, whether it be with a guy like Morrill Stevens or Swain or Hammond, to find that new safety blanket guy, that new threat. And I wouldn't call his chemistry with Cleveland like a safety blanket because he was heaving the ball down the field, but he's going to have to find a go-to guy to establish that passing game identity for this offense. Because right now, the identity in the passing game that we know we've got is nothing really but to the slot receivers. It's the screens and getting Tony out in space and getting Powell out in space. They got to start going down the field, and it has to happen this week.
I completely agree. So, Bill, right before we go here, how do you think Florida fares when LSU comes to town?
I think they could get it done, and I think they will get it done. I think LSU's got problems. Nothing would shock me, of course, but as long as Franks plays smart football, protects the football, and this offensive line takes the next step, I think they'll get it done. I'm not going to put a score on it, and I'm going to let you guys break that down a little more, and I want to watch some more tape. But I feel pretty good going into this football game.
Yep, sounds good. What you got, what Bill was kind of referring to, Will Miles and I, later this week, we'll have Peter Burns on from the SEC Network to help us break down Florida and LSU. Peter Burns has got a kind of history with LSU, so he'll join us here and break down the big rivalry game and kind of explain what the problem is at LSU right now from his point of view. Bill, anything else, friend?
Yeah, one last thing. James at JCrane96 says, will Gator fans ever be happy with winning? Seems like almost everyone is so obsessed with how they do it and not the end result. Just one last thought on this. Look, I see both sides of this. Florida struggled with Tennessee, who's not very good, and Kentucky, who was overrated when they came in, and Vanderbilt, who is Vanderbilt. I mean, they have Captain Crunch for a mascot. Now I'm not going to go off on them like I did with Kentucky, but I will say they haven't won a conference title since Calvin Coolidge was the president. So, and one other thing, I think when people ask who the most famous Commodore is, they still say Lionel Richie. But anyway, listen, I do see both sides of this thing.
Yeah.
Florida's got to prove it against big teams. That's been the knock on McElwain. And, Florida State's down, Georgia's up, LSU is still LSU. You win those 3 games. You win those 2 of those 3, you're feeling pretty good about your season. You win 3 of those 3, you're feeling really good. You win 1 of those 3, it's going to be the same debate carrying in, and people are still going to be asking if McElwain can get it done. People may not like that, but that's the way it is. This is another one of those 5 big games you had coming in: Michigan, Tennessee, LSU, Georgia, and Florida State. It's a season within the season. Yes, it's almost half your schedule, but it's time to go toe-to-toe with a big-time program and thump them in the mouth.
Yep, 3 years in, he's only lost 3 SEC games, but it's still struggling against the teams that shouldn't be struggling against, but finding a way to win. You have to like that. It beats the alternative. A win is better than a loss, no matter what you say, no matter how you dice it. But as Bill said, it is time to get the big wins. And if this team can continue to build week by week like they're doing now, you will start to see, maybe by the time they play Georgia, they're right there neck and neck with Georgia. You get there, you beat the teams you're supposed to beat. And look, Florida State's not the same Florida State. This is a winnable game. This is a game you have to win this year. You get them at home. But we'll let the season play out from here to there. Bill, that was a good one, my friend.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate all you guys submitting the great questions. Dave, I appreciate you having me on. I got some good things ahead. Yep,
for sure. So you can find Bill on Twitter at RealBSykes. That's Sikes. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.